we are going to kind of structure this as an informal Q&A. We're going to give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their trajectory, how they got to be where they are. And then I have a long list of questions that I will be pulling from, but if anyone has questions more immediately they would like to ask, or if you've asked a question either on the link that was sent out, the Google form that was sent out last week, or at some point in the past. I know we've had a different job market conversation in the past. You can feel free to kind of ask your own question and not have me voice it for you. So this is meant to be a bit of a follow-up conversation to the one that we had in the spring, where the one in the spring was from the perspective of people who have served on a lot of search committees, often chaired several search committees, and kind of what they look for in applications and applicants. This is going to be, thank you, a little bit closer to the ground, a little bit more of a recent applicants tell-all or tell some. Obviously, this is a fantastic panel of 6 that we're really excited to see, but their experiences are not universal, and they only represent a small subsection of applications, mostly to schools in the US, Canada, the UK, and Germany. But there are certainly other experiences that we will look forward to hearing more about in the future. So Julia, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. Really nice to be here again. So probably best to just talk a bit about my trajectory. So I studied psychology in Tübingen in Germany. This is also where I was born. Funny enough, I actually worked in the same building that I was born in the end. And I wanted to study in Tübingen because I had 2 little brothers and sisters, so I wanted to stay around during my studies. And then towards the end of my studies, I did a lab visit, or like internship at the University of York with Silke Goebel, and that kind of got me into numerical cognition, which then got me sort of talking to Hans Christoph Nürk more, and this is also where I did my PhD. So I also did my PhD in Tübingen. So I'm kind of one of these people that kind of sticked around for where they came from, which is very nice and not very common, I would say, in academia, I suppose. Well, I finished my PhD in 2000, well, officially 2018, so like 2017. And it just so happened that Corbinian Möller, who was sort of my boss at that time, got a grant at the German Research Foundation with a postdoc position. So that kind of was an easy transition to my first postdoc, which I had for like 1 year. And then I did another lab visit at the University of Loughborough, just because there's some interesting people there, and saw that this is a really great place, and they got a big grant, hired people. I applied, and then for like 1.5 years now, I'm a lecturer at the University at Loughborough in the UK. So that's kind of how I ended up in my position. So not very much. So it feels like not very effortful, and I feel really lucky, but in the end, things kind of opened up for me and worked out, which is probably also a kind of rare thing, I would say. Very happy to be in the UK now, despite the whole situation. Yeah, maybe that is that from my side.
Great, thank you. Sarah, because you're to Julia's left in my screen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Sarah Eason. I am from Maryland originally, did all of my schooling there, studied psychology, and then got my master's in clinical psych and worked as a lab coordinator for a few years before going to my PhD in human development. did my PhD at University of Maryland, and my last year there, I did go on the job market and applied to a handful of professor positions, and actually did get one visit. I think I'll say it was probably a mutual decision that it wasn't a good fit, and ended up getting a postdoc at University of Chicago, where I was there for 4 years, mostly working with the DREAM network. And then my third year there, I went on the job market and had more success than as a grad student. Had a couple phone or video interviews and one in-person visit. And then my fourth year was the last year, and that was when I got the job at Purdue. And so now I'm a assistant professor in human development and family studies at Purdue.
Awesome. And Karina.
Hi, everyone. My name is Karina Hamamouche, and I am currently an assistant professor of psychology at Butler University in Indianapolis. So I attended Butler actually as an undergraduate, studied psychology and French here, was able to get some research experience, but I'm at a small liberal arts school, so a little bit different perspective. And we didn't really have much developmental psychology research happening. So I did a summer internship. It just so happened to be a numerical cognition. I had applied to all different kinds of developmental positions. It just so happened it was number, and fell in love with that. After I graduated from Butler, I did my master's and PhD at Boston College with Sarah Cordes. And I always kind of knew I wanted to be in at a little liberal arts school where my primary focus would be teaching. Research would also be important, but I never really intended on having master's students, PhD students. I wanted to focus on the undergraduate side of things. So I did go on the job market my last year of my PhD, and I was very fortunate to get a job that year at Belmont University in Nashville, Tennessee. I was there for 2 years. I loved it there, but an opportunity to come back to Indianapolis came up, and I thought, it's now or never. I'll see what happens, and it just happened to work out. So I can give kind of a perspective on if you're interested in liberal arts positions. I know this isn't the time to talk about it, but if you have a question about what the difference might be of your life if you're at a liberal arts institution versus a research-focused institution, please feel free to let me know, because I'd be happy to talk about that as well.
Wonderful, thank you. And since you mentioned Belmont, we'll go to Eric.
I was hoping I'd be able to make that transition. So I actually did my undergraduate at Belmont, where Karina taught. I studied philosophy, never thought I'd be a scientist studying numerical cognition, but I fell in love with the process of education and what it does to the human mind. So I actually moved to Madrid and taught for a couple of years. And then I did a transitionary master's in mind-brain education at Harvard, where I got interested in numerical cognition. And then I was a research analyst doing meta-analysis and intervention work after that at Vanderbilt for a couple of years. And then I did a transition. I applied to PhD programs and did my PhD at Vanderbilt in neuroscience with Gavin Price, studying numerical cognition in a psych and human development lab. So spanned a few departments, and then decided I didn't apply to any academic professor positions. I did a postdoc in Canada for 3 years and went on the job market twice. With Daniel and Sarah, I did a postdoc. I got a federal Canadian grant to do that, worked pretty independently there. And went on the job market once, applied a couple of times just to, see how. I saw a couple of positions that I was super interested in. I couldn't pass them up. And then, I applied the next year, pandemic year, and I will start January 2022. So in a few months at LSU, Louisiana State University. where I'll be an assistant professor.
Great, and let's make the Canada transition and go to Mojtaba.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mojtaba. I'm originally from Iran, and I studied for my bachelor and master rehabilitation, actually here. And for a couple of years, I've worked with children with developmental disorders. That was the time that I was so much interested in knowing, underlying mechanisms of like those disease, to see what's going wrong in the brain and things like that. And so I switched back to academia, and I applied for some PhD programs, and I got an admission from University of Tuebingen from different lab. For a few months I worked there, and then I switched to Hans Christoph Nurk's lab, the lab that Julia Bandmüller was working there. She started a few months before me. So I did my PhD there, and I finished in 2017. It was a time that I was not so optimistic about, getting a tenure position in the market. And Hans Christoph actually encouraged me to just send a couple of applications to apply for some jobs, particularly in the UK, to see whether I see any chances. And it was a time that I got actually 2 offers right after my PhD, but it was just a kind of practice for myself to be confident and to see that I may find my place in academia. So I somehow declined them and continued my postdoc there. I stayed for 2 years in the same lab, and applied for 2 grants. Luckily, I got both. One was brain scan coming to Daniel's lab. But before applying, I was in contact. This was like some of the questions that I read might be answered like that. But I was in contact. I tried to get in contact first with Daniel to see, whether he wants me to be there, because I really wanted to be there. But it had to be definitely mutual. Yeah, he agreed, and I put together one application and applied for that. And at the same time, I applied for Marie Curie. This is a European, to go to Spilkey's lab at Harvard. I got that one as well, but because of political conflict and between Iran and the US and travel ban, things like that. So I was unable to go there. So anyway, I was very happy going to Daniel's lab. And after a few years, like after 3 years, this year I was on the market again, and I applied for some jobs in Canada and in the UK, and I got a job at the University of Surrey. Yeah, I think it's somehow all.
Congratulations. While we talk about countries with fraught political tensions, Jenny is going to be a faculty member at Education University of Hong Kong. It was a bit of a stretch of a transition, but I'll take what I can get.
Good job, Anne. So hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Yunchen Chen. So I started research in psychology when I was at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I worked with Martha Elabadi. I kind of just stumbled into the lab really randomly. They just needed another RA, and so my friend pulled me in when I was a sophomore. The lab was just so wonderful. I really loved my time there, so I ended up staying the 3 years of my college in the lab, and then did my senior thesis. And I didn't know what to do after finishing college, so I decided that, well, research is kind of fun. I guess I'll keep doing that. And then so I applied to different PhD programs and landed at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, working with Michelle Mazzocco. in the DREAM network that Sarah Eason mentioned, as a student affiliate when I was there. And then I worked on my dissertation in 2017, defended in 2018. I didn't apply for any faculty positions then. And then after that, I applied for postdoc in the spring before I graduated. And then now I am at the Worcester Polytechnic Institute, working with Aaron Ottmer on grad school math and learning technology and mathematics and learning algebra. And I knew that I had at least 3 years with Aaron with her funding and her project. So I didn't apply for faculty position in 2018 or 2019. And then so 2020 was the first time that I was on the market, and luckily I landed a job so I can be off the market for the coming year. So yes, I will be going to Education University of Hong Kong as an assistant professor in early childhood education. I'm super excited about that because I was from Taiwan, and so being in Hong Kong will be really close to my family. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those fantastic introductions. So I hear a lot of kind of, I don't want to say jargon, but terms being bandied about psychology, human development, family studies, neuroscience, educational psychology, applied psychology, psychology in education programs, human development programs in schools of arts and sciences. I would love to hear about kind of how you delineated these and made those decisions about kind of, I'm a better fit for a human development program than a developmental psychology position. If that's something that you thought about, if it's not, how you kind of figured out among yourselves how you were a cognitive science person versus an education person, when I think the work that we hear in the MCLS too can really fit in several different categories. It's not so much of a question as a prompt. So anyone who wants to jump in can do so.
I'll just quickly say I applied to everything. If I felt like I was remotely qualified, if it had anything about development, obviously we do a lot of cognition as well. So I applied to cognitive psychology positions. Now, I didn't get phone interviews for any of those, so clearly not the right fit. But the first time I was on the market, I was just like, I'm going to apply for everything and see kind of what happens. Now, maybe that's not good advice, but it was really good practice. And how to, I had 2 different research statements, a more cognitive one, a more developmental one, and just thinking about how I could be in multiple different areas.
I also second what Karina said, that I cast a fairly wide net when I was applying last year. So I applied to cognitive, developmental, educational, education program. Even like the really weird one I applied to was cyber psychology, because now I'm working with educational technology. And I found it to be a really valuable experience, thinking about my position and what kind of work that I do and how I can draw connection to these different disciplines, and think about myself not like particularly fitting in certain being, but how I can talk to these different people in different way. And so I found it to be a really, really good practice. I ended up getting more interviews from developmental positions, which makes sense since my PhD was in development. But I feel like if you do have the time, just apply and learn more about the program, because you may be surprised that maybe you're not sure if you're a good fit, but you ended up actually, after talking with them, that it may turn out to be great. So I would say give them a chance and give yourself a chance.
Yeah, I'd second that and say the hiring committees will tell you if you're not a good fit. Basically, So I've also been surprised that, you know, you think that they're looking for exactly X type of person with this exact fit, and really there's not necessarily always consensus about like who exactly they went to hire, and sometimes the position's a little bit different. Sometimes their needs are many as a department, and it's an opportunity they see you come across and it's not exactly the right fits the job description, but maybe that's actually they were looking for somebody like you. So if you're like kind of true to what you do, they'll end up at a place that can support that. I didn't, you know, say, oh, I'm going to apply to this other job that's not really me and change who I am to apply there. So, and I've heard of people getting hired, you know, in, you know, things that didn't necessarily fit exactly the job description. So a committee will definitely tell you if you're not a good fit.
Yeah, I think going along with that, I definitely applied to things in both psychology and human development. Definitely got more responses from family studies, child development, human development, some education programs rather than psychology departments. Especially, I think if I did get some psychology responses, it was smaller schools. It wasn't like R1 psych departments, which makes sense. One thing I will say is that I flagged a lot of jobs that I didn't end up applying to, because when I started writing my cover letters for them, if I found that I couldn't genuinely write something about why I was a good fit, I was like, this isn't worth my time. Like, I'm not going to write a convincing letter. And so, because a lot of my cover letters, like my last paragraph would be kind of like tying together like how I would fit into what they were looking for. And if I was looking at their website and I didn't see anybody that I'd be excited to collaborate with, or like their mission statement didn't click with anything that I felt like I could say, that was a good way of weeding out some jobs. You know, I think it's good to keep an open mind when you're looking, but also don't feel like you have to apply to everything that you are a potential fit for.
Just wanted to add, yeah, so this fit is usually more thought of like, do they think I fit into their apartment? But in the end, it's both ways, right? So I also have to feel like it's something somewhere where I want to work. Of course, you have to apply very broad to get something, but it's super important, I think, not to forget, you know, am I gonna be happy with, there's a comment in the chat, like with what I will have to teach there, or the kind of research they're doing there. So do I actually fit, or do I have to like stop doing the research that I love doing now to kind of make things work in a way? So it's always also important that you really want to go there, not just to get a job somehow. I know this is kind of tricky because, you know, everyone needs a job, but yeah.
What I can also add is that, you know, if you're unsure about any advertisement, just go ahead and apply for that. I would say, you know, you will get plenty of information during the interview, and you know, that would be decisive, will help you to decide whether you want to take that job or not. I don't know, my experience, like, you know, sometimes I 100% agree with the colleagues there, but you know, this year when I was writing some cover letters, I was like super confident that this is written for myself. You know, it's like just my name is missing there. But I didn't get that job because there were definitely some, you know, let's say better applicants than me applying for that. I didn't restrict myself, but of course I had my keywords that, you know, these are my keywords, and if I can fulfill them, yeah, then I would apply.
Great. So I'm going to ask two questions simultaneously then. One, I would love if you could each answer in the chat, which is, if you remember, if you haven't done what you can to clear your memory entirely and just black it out, can you put in the chat how many positions you applied for? And then the kind of bouncing off of Mojtaba's point of the keywords in an application or in job postings. I know that seeing job postings coming out now, there's so many of them are so broad, so many of them are so vague about what they're looking for, whereas others are very clear. It's like, we need someone who does fMRI research on social cognition. It's like, okay, that's definitively not me. How do you decode these job postings that are intentionally vague? Or like, what keywords did you look for?
A lot of times you can't decode them from the job application, but you can do more decoding by comparing the job application and the department. So that can give you some more information to support the way you're viewing the application.
So when you say that, Eric, are you saying that you're looking for what the department doesn't have, or what the department does have and kind of prioritizes based on what the faculty already do, and if there's kind of a line of research that they're trying to fill?
In my experience, it was, I saw one, I applied most of the places that had the resources that could support my research. And then in the department for the ad, it was cognitive neuroscience position. And I saw kind of where their focus was as a department, and that it was very similar to my own, and that they had a tendency to group people that focus on aspects of attention. And that is what I used to inform my cover letter for the one that I was successful at. I don't know if that's pretty idiosyncratic, but I felt like looking at the departmental website that was going to hire helped me see like maybe how they saw themselves. Give me a little bit more information.
I feel like, Andy, your question could go both ways, right? That if there are certain gap in the department, your cover letter can say that I can fill that gap because I do ABC, and that's the position you're hiring for. That's the area that you're hiring for. But if they don't have anyone who does work that is similar to yours, you could still argue, or who does similar work to yours, you could still argue that, oh, I would love to collaborate with these people. And then so I think it's just depending on how you frame it and like what is the position they're looking for, and do you think you can fit in that position?
If I can add something to what Jenny said, it was a great point, actually. I think making a kind of balance between what doesn't exist there and what exists there in a lab, in the department, is one of the critical points. Because if we say that, we are like replicating someone's work who is now working in the same department, they would say, well, it's just replication of someone else. Or if you say I'm doing totally different things, they may be concerned that how you would collaborate with them, because collaboration within the department is also important for them. So it's a kind of trade-off to make that, I bring something new, however, because of the overlaps with these people, I can easily collaborate with them.
Especially at smaller institutions as well. If you have a very small department, like you are likely the only developmental psychologist. And so there's that piece too. You can think about collaborating outside of the department. So I talked about, oh, there's this person in education, they teach math teachers, for example, I could collaborate with that person. So also thinking outside of your department can be helpful, especially in some of those smaller departments.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I just personally going through this right now, I'm getting like advice from people for the same posting saying, oh, that department looks like a really good fit for you. People do similar work. And, oh, you do too much similar work to people in that department, they'll never hire you. And it's like, oh, okay, that doesn't really give me anywhere to jump off from, but it sounds like towing the line is a good approach. So again, I'm gonna ask for one thing in the chat and a different thing over voice, which is you all applied to a lot of positions or very few positions, depending on who you are. Can you drop in the chat where you found your postings, and then just for resources as to what we should be refreshing 3 times a day? And then particularly for people who've applied abroad and applied internationally. So really, Jenny, Mojtaba, Julia, I know Eric, you applied in Canada at least. What are your advice? What are your pieces of advice for folks who are interested in applying abroad, especially where they're not, a lot of the same language doesn't apply. So things like what we would call assistant professor in the US is frequently referred to, I believe, as lecturer in the UK. Any words of advice?
Can I ask one thing? Since we have such a small group, well, a good group, but like if people might say in the chat where they're thinking of applying, like probably some to the US, but maybe other countries, in that way somebody who's applied there could speak to that.
So for like, I applied for a few positions outside of US, some in China, some in Hong Kong, some in Taiwan. And I think I found actually most of the postings through AERA. Yeah, I still haven't figured out how to actually get the local postings. It's more for like if they post internationally through those societies, then I would apply for those. Yeah.
So I guess from my perspective, so whenever you apply to a country that you don't know the system, talk to many people, figure out, find someone who is in that system, right? And talk to them. They know all the insights and they will, point you to maybe other people or other resources that are sort of worth considering. So the UK system is very different from the German system, for example, right? And they are different in many ways. Also names, for example. I'm not sure whether anybody else calls an assistant professor a lecturer or something. So get someone who knows that system well and ask them as many questions as you can. Or ask someone that came also from like another country and applied there. They will know all the hurdles that they figured out afterwards, either when they got the position or not. They will have all the insights. And I guess that applies to every single country, whether it's, someone from Europe applying to the US or the other way around or whatever. You need someone that might not be involved in that whole process. Doesn't have to be the same university necessary, but I think it would be ideal or something, but just someone in that system that will get you started. Gather as much information as you can, I would say. And just approach people. Usually, if some random person would approach me, can we have a chat? I would totally do that, knowing how all these things work. And I'm sure most or many people would be happy to do that. To a degree, of course, but yeah, that's my 2 cents, I would say.
So just to ground this question a little bit more, I guess I have 2 related questions, which is kind of how does, obviously for your own experiences, how does the timeline work in each different system, and how do the materials work for I know that like in the US, we have a pretty strict system where most of the applications go on sometime in the fall, typically between kind of August and December. Occasionally there will be a spring hire. And then there's some question mark amount of time before first interviews, and then a question mark amount of time before a second interview, and then a question mark amount of time before a flyout. How does that, I know that in other countries that might be less tied to kind of a specific time of year. Can you speak to that including in the US, how that worked for you?
I may comment on that. So yeah, because I applied for the jobs in the UK and Canada, I would say they are like not 100%, but 99% different. They're very different from each other. For example, in Canada, it's very similar as like the timeline for the application. Usually it's like end of August or beginning of September till November, December. You will see the job post, but in the UK, you will see the post through the whole year. So maybe sometimes a bit more but it never stops, right? So and also regarding the materials, they are very different from each other. In the UK, I would say it's much easier because in the first step, they don't require that much. But in Canada, for me, it was a kind of cultural shock because, the first time I was like, because for the UK, when you have, usually when you have your CV ready, and your cover letter as kind of the first draft that you prepared at some point, maybe in half a day or one day, you can, prepare your application. But in Canada, for me, the first application took me about like 2 to 3 weeks to prepare, because it was like, teaching dossier, I don't know, research statement, all these files, like 3 to 5 pages. I never wrote them. It's a very different culture. And I think Julia's point was a great point. So I also highly recommend to get in touch with someone who has been in that academic culture for a couple of years, or someone who knows the job market there, that how the things should look like.
Maybe a word on that. So I think the UK is again a country that's just very special, also in terms of faculty applications. For Germany, for example, it's fairly similar with what you described. For Canada, I would say you need like a teaching statement, maybe, and sort of a research statement, your CV, the cover letter, maybe something else that might be specific to a certain position. But I guess it's actually rather common to have like a research and a teaching statement. That's just not a thing in the UK, at least not from what I've seen so far. Might be part of some applications, but usually it's easier, I would say. Yeah, less effortful. Yeah.
Varying timeline is something that makes it really hard because not every institution's on the same page. And so you might be getting an offer and still have interviews lined up for the future. And you're kind of in a really tough spot because you either take this job and hope the others wouldn't have panned out, or you don't take it and hope the others pan out. And so I don't have a great solution to that other than just be aware that that timeline does vary. I mean, the position that I just accepted, it came out in February. I interviewed at the end of March and accepted the job in April. Like, that is very late. And that is not ideal in a lot of ways for a lot of reasons, but there are just really different timelines for each institution, although it does seem to me that the deadlines I've been seeing lately are getting earlier and earlier. So like, I mostly did on-campus interviews in November. I knew where I was going to be by the end of December. So that was the timeline I kind of had in my head, but I know that's not always the case.
One thing I'll say about timelines is that last year was super weird. And it was you know, a lot of departments and universities were figuring out their budgets. They halted hires. It was the worst job market in a long time. Now we're in a better job market. People are probably trying to push through hires as the Delta surge in the US happens and worldwide. And who knows what's going to happen? It's very unpredictable. So, like, yes, listen to things that we say and people that have been on the job market, but also sort of take it with a grain of salt that it may be different this year and things may roll in at different times. So it's last year was an unpredictable year. It looks like this year is going to be an unpredictable year. So keep an eye, just keep looking for the positions because it may be an unusual timeline.
In terms of the document, I think for the Asian countries, sometimes they don't require the research in the teaching statement. Sometimes they will only ask for a cover letter and ask you to fill out a form for other information. But some places will still ask for those documents. So it really depends more on places than between countries, I think. And then in terms of timelines between countries, I think most of the places that I apply to do follow like similar kind of timeline, even though it's kind of staggered between institutions. And then, but the process is somewhat, well, there are a lot of similarities, but there are a little bit of differences between the countries that I applied to. So for example, for the position I applied to in Taiwan, they only did a interview, like a 40-minute or an hour interview with me, which was like with the search committee, and I gave a presentation and then they asked me some questions, and then I just got an offer after that. I didn't even go through a second round of interview with that. And then with the one in Hong Kong, I think it was, I did an informal chat with the department chair. And then I had a screening interview with the search committee for like half an hour or an hour, and then gave a talk to the department, and then I got an offer. So I didn't actually have like a full day interview with Hong Kong with like various different members in the department. But in the US, I think most of the interview I would get is the screening interview, which is half an hour to an hour, and then the full day interview, which is 1 or 2 days, meeting with a search committee and then individuals within the department and students and everyone there, and getting to know more about the department.
That's all really helpful. Thank you. So before we get into kind of the nitty-gritty of the materials and the interview process, the job talks, things like that, I just wanted to take a step back and ask about your experiences with postdocs. Kind of what helped you decide whether you wanted to do a postdoc, what helped you decide what postdoc to take, where you found postdoc listings, if you did, or did you reach out to people directly? I know that for some of you, you applied to jobs and got them and went on a postdoc anyway. And for others, I mean, for myself, I applied to a couple jobs and I'm incredibly glad that I didn't take them because I feel like I've grown so much through my postdoc. So I would love kind of your experiences of pros and cons.
Yeah, I don't know if I really chose to do a postdoc. I think it was more that, you know, that first round on the job market as a grad student didn't pan out. And so then it was looking for postdocs because, you know, that was the alternative because I didn't want to leave academia. I think I mostly found those through Cognitive Development Society listserv. I remember the one for the position I ended up getting and taking, I think 4 different people forwarded to me before I had actually seen the original listing. So I figured it was probably a good fit. But yeah, I think, I'm trying to remember what other parts of your question there were, Andy. whether it's a pros and cons of it. Was that part of it?
Yeah, and kind of also, I don't know if this is something that anyone can speak to directly, but kind of pros and cons of having a lengthier postdoc versus not. So like, Eric, I know that you still have some additional funding, I believe, in your postdoc, and I know you've deferred your start date as an assistant professor. Some people might choose to apply earlier, even though they have additional postdoc funding. So kind of when you feel you're ready for the job market versus when you run out of money and you have to go on the job market. This is, again, a vague prompt and not actually a direct question.
I think some of it depends on what kind of postdoc you get. If you have one that is like more specifically funding for you to do a project where you can hit the ground running with what you're doing, or if there's already ongoing things. I think the one that I was a part of, because it was this network that was just getting up and running and there was a lot of development happening, and there was funding, so I didn't feel pushed to go on the market that like first or second year. I think that helped, but I think if you are strategic about it in terms of what you want to get done in 1 or 2 years and really, choose a couple things that you'll have like nice deliverable projects at the end of it. Or if you get something like a, postdoc fellowship where it is really focused on you developing your own research. I think it's something where even if you have funding, I think you can get more done in a shorter time.
Yeah, I would also, sorry, as I know that you're about to speak, but if you can also speak to kind of what was great about your postdoc, and did you teach, did you do research, did you, I know that most people talk about how it's the most relaxing time because you don't have any teaching obligations and can just focus on your research. Other people talk about how they loved the teaching experience that came along with it. So one more thing to throw in there.
Since you mentioned the fact that I deferred my start date, I'll just say I didn't really know that that was a thing until I talked to other people, and then it is a thing, and it seems like it's a pretty common thing. So if, when I was thinking about this session and advice that I give people, it's like, you can go ahead and apply, even if you feel like maybe you're not sure, but if you see a position that you'd like, if you get it, like oftentimes you can defer. It's relatively easy for universities, it seems. Also, the postdoc are somewhat field specific. It's very common in like cognitive neuroscience. And one thing that I think about is like, if I need a few more years to make my CV look like what it is, the type of people that they're typically hiring in a department that I'd ultimately like to be at. And that's maybe a good way. I don't know what others think of deciding whether or not you want to do a postdoc. It's like in 3 years, I would look like somebody that is, record-wise of what this department is looking to hire. Otherwise, I wouldn't necessarily be able to apply for that position. Sometimes that's one way to think about whether the postdoc is a good opportunity, or if you have another skill or you want to transition to slightly different, like I want to master this technique and I can go work with this person. If there's another part of your training that you'd like to round out, because oftentimes it's really hard to do that when you start as a faculty person. From my understanding, I haven't done it, Sarah, but time gets slow.
So what I had like a 1-year postdoc before I started the lectureship, sort of, but I had actually 3 years time. So, but then this position came up and it was just like very good fit, something to not miss out. But what I now think from time to time is like, I don't know, it doesn't have to be a long postdoc, or it doesn't have to be like 5, but 1, 2-3 year postdoc position gives you time to really develop your thing, which is kind of tricky to do when you either go from PhD directly into like a faculty position or have a 1-year postdoc, which is not really enough time to kind of think about what you actually want to do, especially if it's a postdoc position where it's not like a fellowship where you do your thing, but you kind of do the project that someone else thought about. So in that sense, I think it helps to sort of have this at least one postdoc. If not, it's probably good to give yourself some slack in your sort of faculty position. So it will just take a little bit longer until your research path might be clear or something. That's kind of something I think would be an argument to do a postdoc, depending, of course, also how that looks and how much freedom you have to do your thing or time to kind of bring your research in or your ideas. Yeah.
If I can add one point to that, I think doing postdoc is a good time to develop somehow your research identity before going into a tenure position with administration, teaching, which is of course nice, but right. So to somehow establish yourself in a field that you're working, I think it's a good time, like the best time to develop your research identity is like the postdoc time.
I totally agree with Mojtaba. And I think I really benefited a lot from doing a postdoc. I think it made me so much more competitive than compared to when I was just fresh out from a PhD program. I think the thing that I looked for when I was looking for postdoc positions was, can I learn a new thing and grow in a new area? And like Mojtaba said, figuring out my identity. And also, is this position going to give me the flexibility to actually figure out what I want to do? Do I still want to do research? Do I want to do teaching? Do I have the opportunity to explore all these different possibilities? So that's something that I thought about too when I was looking for postdocs. And then what else? I think so I really do love a postdoc. I think the flexibility part may depend partly on the funding sources, but in general, I think postdoc is somewhat flexible in terms of the kind of the projects or aspects of projects that you're working on sometimes maybe. And then I think the downside of doing a postdoc, I think a lot of people do complain about is the possibility of having to move again in a couple of years. And so I know a lot of people are just like eager to settle down and wanting to just find a place and be done with moving. But I think for me, it was really beneficial.
I'll say one other quick benefit of a postdoc is that if you have opportunities to mentor or supervise graduate students or undergraduate students on research projects, I think that is valuable when you're presenting yourself for faculty positions, that you have some of that experience being able to assist a trainee on research or I know at my postdoc, I was able to actually be the primary supervisor for a student's master's thesis. And I think that can stand out when you're applying for faculty jobs.
That's really helpful. Thinking again about kind of types of jobs to apply for, types of schools to apply for, there's, at least, again, this is coming from a very US-centric standpoint, but we have small liberal arts colleges, we have kind of elite small liberal arts colleges, we have R2 universities, we have R1 universities. I don't know exactly what the equivalent of all of these different types of schools are in other countries. But do you have a sense of how you decided what kind of person you wanted to be? So I know Karina said at the beginning that she always wanted to be at a SLAC. I would love any thoughts you have.
I didn't know what I wanted to be. So I applied to everywhere. I applied to SLAC, I applied to R1, applied to R2, applied to more teaching-oriented positions because I really just didn't know what I want. But I think the process of interviewing with different places helped a lot in helping me figure out what I like and what I don't like. And so, yeah, so I didn't really know what I wanted.
I think this could be one of the other advantages of doing a postdoc or two, or I don't know, more, is that gradually you can figure it out that, where is your interest in academia. So for myself, it was like during those years, it was more and more clear that, I want to do research. So if the research is, if the position is not more research oriented, I wouldn't take it. Or for example, I never applied for teaching oriented positions.
I think I honestly did not think I wanted to be in an R1 institution. Like I applied because this particular job seemed like a fantastic fit, and I was really excited about it. And but I really thought I wanted more of a teaching oriented position. And when I interviewed here and learned more about what it meant here to be an R1 institution and the support that they give for faculty, I think that's why, going on what Jenny said about applying to everything. And I think Mojtaba, you mentioned this, like, you learn a lot during the interviews. And so even if it's something that going into the interview you're not sure about, you might learn a lot more about it and, get really excited about something that you didn't think might be a good fit for you.
Maybe some like naive question or comment. I think this huge differences in the US between different institutions, it's not the case in, I don't know, at least the countries that I'm familiar with. Of course, there's like in the UK, but also in Germany, there is faculty positions where you have to teach a little bit more or a little bit less. Or I don't know, if you get third-party funding, you might kind of buy you out of teaching or something like that. But there is not, I guess the variety of different types of positions, faculty positions at a university are not as big. Seems to be a very big decision in the US, or like figuring out where I want to go. I guess it's less this kind of decision in Germany or the UK. At least that's my impression.
Yeah, I think I agree that in Hong Kong and Taiwan, I don't see as big of a difference between like R1 versus R2 or SLAC. So I think it is maybe a more US centric thing.
On the other hand, so if you don't stay at a university, but independent research institute. So if you really want to do research only, you cannot really do that at the university. That's just not a thing. But that's kind of general, I would say. That, of course, there is the opportunity for these few positions where you can just do research. But yeah.
So I did mention I always wanted to be at a liberal arts school, and I do just want to say there are some things that I learned throughout the graduate school process that also kind of solidified that. I loved mentoring like undergraduate theses, so having that undergraduate connection. I knew I could be successful as a teacher. So I do need to do research, but my tenure does not depend on me getting 1 million grants or publishing 10 papers a year or anything like that. I could control the things that would be, I guess, important for my career. And that was also a big draw for me. So if you are thinking about a smaller institution, thinking about, can you conduct your future research that you want to conduct there? Do they have supplies or resources for you to do that? If they don't, and that future research is something that's really important for you, then maybe a liberal arts institution isn't the right fit. Now, some liberal arts schools do have tons of resources for research, others not so much. So that's also something you might want to be considering thinking about your future, and if you are doing a postdoc and the research you want to be conducting, can you be successful doing that research wherever you are applying?
All right, thank you. So I have two different directions I'm thinking about taking this. One is about kind of how much you tailored applications to specific or materials to specific applications. And I know some things are mentioned about kind of that last paragraph of your cover letter, things about highlighting classes that you'd be able to teach in your teaching statement that they might need or that they might offer. The other direction is kind of what the interview process is like. So I'll ask both questions and you can answer either. So one is kind of during the application process, and then the other is, great job, you've been shortlisted. Now you have to talk to someone and prove that you're a coherent human.
So for tailoring, I think most of my tailoring happens in the cover letter. If it's a cognitive position, I'll highlight the cognitive aspects of my research. If it's developmental, I'll highlight the developmental. And I think a surface level tailoring that I did was that if it's a cognitive position, I'll say I study cognitive mechanisms of math learning. If it's a developmental position, I say I study developmental mechanisms of, but really I study the cognitive development of math learning. So I just like use these very subtle or slightly different way of phrasing in cover letter and in research statement. But in general, I don't really change the main things, the meat of all my document. I think in the cover letter, though, I do highlight different publications for different type of positions. So if it's a cognitive position, I'll highlight more of like the chapters I wrote, more relevant to cognition. Or if it's applied, then I'll highlight more of the applied publication that I have. And then for the, and another thing is that where I would look at the department website and look at their mission. And like, I think Sarah mentioned this before, like whatever clicks with you and write it into the cover letter. So there are more tailoring in the cover letter. And what I ended up doing is that like halfway through my like months of application, I started just highlighting the parts that I usually tailor. And then so I have a template of everything that I make a copy of. And then I will go in and just edit those parts for each application that I submit. But yeah, so the cover letter is really the only thing I really tailor. There are a couple of paragraphs depending on what they're looking for in the job ad and in the department website.
Great. So, oops, sorry, Sarah had to leave. I might not have told her when this was ending, so that's all on me. But we are planning to go until 12:30 Eastern, if that works for everyone, 90-minute total session. Okay, so again, the questions were about tailoring your materials and about interviews, how you approached interviews, what kind of interview questions you got, what was whatever you want to say about interviews, really. And we can go from there. Also, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand. I don't need to be the only one speaking here.
I just want to say, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, it's okay.
Totally agree with Jenny. I think the main thing that changes is really sort of cover letter. You can do some also mini changes in your CV, for example, like change the order. If it's a teaching focused position, put teaching further up or something like that to give the priority in your CV. But in the end, I don't think that this would be a game changer, the order of things in your CV, right? So I guess it's about the cover letter. And make clear that you read the application and what you're applying for, that kind of thing. Job interview, I guess these if you Google for typical questions in academic job interviews, that's kind of it. That's what you should prepare for. There is lists of these questions, and be sure to have answers to these typical questions lists, I would say. That gives you made me calm, because I knew, well, some of them will come and I have prepared, I know what to say. And then some might be more unexpected questions, but usually I would say nothing super surprising. That's my impression, both from sort of being interviewed and also interviewing other people. I guess might be phrased somehow differently or something, but in the end, yeah. Would be glad to hear from others, but in the end, you can prepare for these interviews very well. It takes a lot of time, I think. But yeah.
Yeah, I have a slide deck that I shared with some people. I'm happy to share that too. It's just kind of my way of outlining the type of questions and the type of answers that I would give. They would they would ask about research, they would ask about teaching. So with research, usually they'll ask tell me about your research program, tell me about yourself. What is your short-term, long-term goal? If it's a research position, I'll ask, maybe you can talk about the potential funding sources that you will get funding from to do your research. And then with teaching oriented, or they will also ask about teaching. So what is your teaching philosophy? What are some courses that you would teach? So give people a sentence or so about I would teach learning and cognition, and in this class I will talk about these different topics. And then sometimes they may ask about service, but I don't think service usually come up. The one question I think most people ask now is about inclusion and diversity in teaching. So definitely be prepared for those type of questions. And then, so screening usually is 30 to 40 minutes. And then if you get to the full day interview, you will get to meet with department chair, the search committee, individuals in the department, and then also the deans. So with deans, usually I think questions would either be, so with deans, I think it's a chance for you to ask more about institutional support that you could get. They may also ask you more about what are your plans for getting funding if it's more of a research oriented position. But that's more of the conversation with the deans and at the college level. But with other people, I think a lot of times it's with the individual, you just have a list of questions that you are ready to ask people, because it's really your chance to figure out if you're going to like that position in that department.
I was in dissertation mode, job mode when I was doing these interviews, and I, wasn't thinking about life outside of work. But I did have a phone interview where the last question was what do you like to do outside of work? And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know. Do I do anything outside of work? I completely panicked. So they do want to know you as a person too. So keep that in mind. I did get some questions about service that I did not feel prepared for. I just didn't think about it, honestly, going into it. They asked, what kind of committees would you think you'd want to be on? And I was like, I will help with the institutional review board. That was the only thing that could come to my mind. So maybe have a little sense of, what some kind of committees you might be able to do. And I mean, you don't need to know every single committee at the university, but just have a couple ideas there. One thing about preparing for a job talk or a teaching demo, if you'll want to know who's going to be in the audience. A lot of times they'll be telling you that, but I think we oftentimes think about teaching and research as being super separate, and there's a lot of ways that you can integrate those things. So I think Julia mentioned this, try to demonstrate some of your teaching habits in your job talk. If there's going to be undergraduates there, or graduate students there, think about how you can incorporate some of those things into it. And also, especially if you have an undergraduate audience, think about how you can make your talk accessible. So if you're using a lot of jargon or very, very specific things, they might be lost. And also thinking about how you can make it applicable to things they have already learned. So I tied it to like top down, bottom up processing, things like that, that these students will be familiar with. They will feel a lot more connected to you and appreciate that as well. So just a couple things on that, I guess.
One thing I'll say about it's interesting the things they asked you, Karina, a little bit different than mine, and it's helpful to hear like the range of people's different experiences. One thing I'll say about the first screening interview, I don't know how much people know about pragmatics. Often like 7 to 10 people are asked for the first screening interview, which is often an hour, which could be digital. It's easier to do now because it's Zoom, and then they invite 3 or 4 people for the full job interview. But that first interview, and more universities, especially in Canada, but also in the US, are making an effort for equities purposes of standardizing it and making it less personal. So I know a lot of people have had not weird, but just impersonal and psych themselves out about that first interview, even though it went well. So they may have a list of questions, and you go and they stop you, and then they ask you the second question that's on their list that they have to ask everybody, and it feels awkward, and it's like not like a natural conversation to have, and you're just talking to a committee. But if that happens, it's normal, and like just don't psych yourself out because it's somewhat meant to be impersonal.
All right, does anyone have any other or any questions that they would like to ask, or should I keep going?
I had a quick question that maybe can just be looped into other stuff if it's irrelevant. I didn't have it. I only found about the meeting yesterday, so I didn't have a chance to submit stuff. One thing that I've been curious about is what is the value of visiting assistant professor positions? I feel like there are some places that are like tempting, and it's like I'm curious about what that sort of path might lead to, or whether it's, you know, viewed similar to a postdoc, or how that might be beneficial, and whether people consider them.
I did consider them. I did to apply to some. Generally, they are very like intentional, like, okay, we need this person to come and teach these 3 classes. And, you know, they have like a very specific goal, and they're usually short term. So if you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to be at this type of institution, maybe that would be a good kind of stepping stone. But yeah, in general, I would say, at least in my experience from what I've seen, the people that have those positions do really treat them as kind of temporary. And so it's probably unlikely that you would end up at that institution long term. Like perhaps if a tenure track position came up and you applied to it, maybe, but I think people do sort of treat that as a stepping stone, typically, at least from what I've heard. Yeah, Andy's saying in the chat about like a teaching postdoc kind of situation. If you have like no teaching experience, but you want to be in a position where you're going to be doing teaching, like absolutely, that's important. And that will give you some credit when you're applying if you've had that teaching experience, for sure.
That was really helpful. Does anyone else have another question? If not, I can kind of ask a related question. Okay. So I think a lot of the people here, and probably a lot of people watching the video, will be a little bit later in their career. I'm guessing most of the people here are kind of first, second year grad students. And so it's folks who are thinking about applying to jobs, thinking about applying to postdocs, are currently postdocs and thinking about going on the job market, or are actively on the job market. As kind of we hit the job market season, do you have a sense of kind of what should be prioritized? I mean, we only have so many hours in a day. Is it do you think it's, and this is obviously something that you can't necessarily speak to, having not sat on a lot of hiring committees, but would you say that it's better to hone that one paper to getting it into a top tier journal, to get as many papers under review as possible, to round out your CV and get some more teaching experience or mentorship? I guess the question is kind of, do we go for breadth or depth? Do we want to show that we're capable of doing everything that's required of a faculty position? Or do we want to show that we're really good at one thing?
I think that's a great question. I would say for most of the faculty position, because they are not 100% research oriented, for example, it's I was told, and it was my experience was also like supporting that claim that it's good to show that, you know, we did some administrative things, even if it was like voluntary work or something, or we did some teaching. And, you know, we can't, because, for example, in the UK, most of the positions are like 40% research, 40% teaching, and 20% administration, right? So it's good that we show that we can somehow check them. Of course, it's clear, and they know, the research committee, they know that we were like PhD or postdoc, right? So we didn't have that much administrative duties or teaching probably. They don't expect to see, like, I don't know, equal amount of research and teaching and administration, but it's always good to, you know, to some sort of, so for example, what I can also add is like, for the UK positions, if you're applying, usually there's a list of questions as qualification. I highly recommend to write those questions one by one in your cover letter and answer them. And if you go through those questions, you will see that, you know, they ask for those non-research questions. And it's not that good that, you know, you have nothing to say there.
Yeah, I think so it would be good, especially for earlier on students, to make sure you get some teaching experience. I feel like at least, like, if you have, like, TA is great, but TA usually don't give you more of like designing the course, putting together the syllabus, and actually planning and doing everything for the course. And so get that experience at least once. But once you get that, I feel like really the second time you teach, it will be a lot more like smoother and all. And so I would say once you have some teaching experience, then it's like put your effort into, I would say, probably in research. But at the same time, I feel like don't kill yourself over trying to publish like all the developmental papers. I feel like at the stage when you're submitting the application, just present the best side of yourself, but also don't be stressed out. I don't know if that paper is going to count for anything. It's just 4 versus 5 paper. I don't know. So don't stress over that. Just try your best, and yeah.
I'll second what Jenny said. It's like, once you've proven that you can teach, both to yourself and somewhere on your CV, they're pretty quickly diminishing returns. It's a huge amount of time where you could be strengthening other aspects of your application. If you love it, and you're going to see yourself in a teaching position, it may be more important. But in terms of applying to research intensive positions, like they actually, and Sarah Eason hinted at this a little bit, I think, by getting mentorship experience. Like, my hiring committee actually cared more about who I was as a mentor, my ability to talk about my mentees, and were really impressed by, like, I knew where they were going and how we worked to get them there. And because in a lot of ways, they're hiring you at a research intensive place to be a core of their graduate programs. And you know, if a lot, not always if you're a good mentor, are you a good teacher, but that's a big, heavy component of, and proving that you can be a good mentor is, it's an intense relationship that you have with students, and like, so that's an important part of teaching.
Yeah, it's also what I totally agree. Try to tick the boxes, but don't overdo it, right? So when you tick that teaching box, that's quite fair. And also, I think at sort of in these early career stages, think of these categories like in a broader sense. For example, admin, right? It doesn't have to be these typical ethics committee thing or something. The typical admin roles that you have at the university could also be something like, I don't know, you're the postdoc spokesperson or something along these lines, where you show that you take responsibility for or contribute somehow beyond your own research or the thing you're doing. I don't know, organizing conferences or something could also be in this service aspect more than, you know, it doesn't have to be only these typical admin jobs you can think of, or admin roles. That's something. Just mention the things that kind of relate to this, showing that you tick all these boxes to a degree, or you started, you know, to look into taking more responsibility. Same thing for like grant applications, right? As a PhD student, or possibly also in your first postdoc, you might not have proof, or you might not have funding, right? But still mention that you have experience writing grant proposal, whether this is in collaboration with your PI, where you contributed to a grant, but you couldn't be on the proposal itself because you didn't have your PhD yet or something like that. Try to mention that, show that you've done things like that. Or you're on the way, you know, you've learned something already, which you can expand on. So I guess think of these categories a bit broader and not in these like strict hardcore criteria that, you know, might apply for, you know, when you hand in the CV to a grant proposal, where you're not supposed to mention, I don't know, things like grants where you contributed but not officially, right? But that can be in a CV, or mention it in your cover letter or something. That's totally fine.
One quick thing I'll add, I totally agree that you cannot be doing everything all the time, and that you do have to prioritize some of these things. From a teaching institution perspective, yes, we want to see that you've been able to teach a class before. That may get you the job, but one thing to keep in mind is that the students at a liberal arts school are going to expect a different type of teaching, perhaps, than if you're at a large institution where you have hundreds of people in class. And like, for example, in my first position, I took a class that I taught at Boston College with 90 students and tried to do it very similarly at Belmont with 25, and it did not go well. The students did not like that I was lecturing most of the time. That is not their expectation. And so even you may have to adjust your expectations once you're actually in that position. And even though you've had that experience and check that box, there are still going to be things that you're going to have to seriously change once you learn more about the students at that institution, the expectations, culture, things like that.
Wonderful, thank you. So we just have a couple more minutes left. If anyone has another question, we can address that. If not, just any parting words of wisdom anyone has would be great. I feel like if not the don't overwork yourself is a good place to end. But if anyone has any other, help each other, support each other.
Support each other. They are not your competitors. They help each other. It's much better to collaborate and like work on this together than trying to compete with each other. It's just not fun. But be happy if like your friend actually get the interview, but you don't. because at least you know someone who's getting that, if not you. And they just somehow is a better fit. That doesn't mean that they're better than you. So yeah, I would say the support system is really, really important and very helpful in the process.
Someone asked for sort of best piece of advice you've received. You know, you can prepare yourself very well, and you can be the perfect fit, and you might be the best applicant they have, but you might still not get that position, because I'm not sure, I wouldn't want to put like a number on it, but quite a bit of it is just random and luck. That's might actually not be on you or what you did or which boxes you ticked. That's just yeah, something to not forget.
I would just say pay attention to your experiences when you're talking to the department, either on the phone or in person, and you will know whether it is a good fit. You will either feel very comfortable and like these people and see how you can fit in, or you won't. And I think it's really, everyone obviously wants a job. It might be easy to say, okay, well, I didn't really enjoy my experience there, but it's the job I got, so I'm going to take it. And I would say you don't have to do that. I mean, obviously, I know getting a job is really important, but listen to yourself and be true to yourself, and don't just take a job because you feel like you have to do that.
What I can also add is to, based on my experience, fitting to a position based on their demand, not necessarily what you read all the time in the advertisement, is the most important criterion, rather than the rank of the school or something like that. So you may be quite fit to a position in a very high ranked school, but at the same time, you may not be shortlisted for very, let's say, low rank or ordinary school, because you're not fit. It doesn't mean that you have bad or like you are not qualified for that position. It just means that, you know, someone else was more fit to that position. It's not about your qualification.
All right, thank you everyone so much for taking the time. Speaking of support, we are starting a job support group, or a job market support group, building off of what Jenny put together and hosted last year. Be sure that you're on the Slack and in the writing group channel to hear more about that. We're trying to nail down a more regular time, but someone's having a really hard time figuring out when that time should be, and that someone is me. So thank you all, and we will look forward to seeing you soon.